Hello and welcome to the BI WizKid YouTube channel. In this video we've got another special live performance from a person called Daniel Marsh-Patrick. Now Daniel is the developer of a custom visual within Power BI called Deneb. Now Deneb is an amazing product. Within it you're able to create your own custom visual without going through the whole process of submitting it to Microsoft and getting that certification from them. Because Daniel has already done all the hard work, he's created the visual, he's published it to Microsoft, he's got all the certifications for it, he's had it certified by Microsoft. Everything that you now create within that app is automatically certified. Now, without further ado, we're going to go over to Dan and allow him to take us through the A to Z of Deneb, declarative visualizations in Power BI. Hashtag vote.
So we're here to talk about Deneb, declarative visualization in Power BI. So a little bit about me, first of all. I am Daniel. I'm from New Zealand. Well, I'm from the UK originally, but I'm living in New Zealand now for the last 16 years. I am an independent sort of freelance consultant, mostly working in Power BI visualization area, but I also work for a company called Discovery AI, and we are a company based in Australia looking at doing environmental analytics. So it's helping out a lot of companies with their programs of work, but also companies that are already eco-focused, but also indigenous groups producing public-facing information. So a lot of Power BI published to web, that kind of thing. So what I'm going to talk about today is very close to my heart because we have lots of fun with custom visuals and published to web. I'm also a member of the Power BI, what we call the core visuals team. So I don't know if anybody is aware of the frustrations with core visuals that are amongst the community right now. Microsoft have just appointed a program manager called Miguel Myers, who is a lovely person. If you have any grievances or asks with core visuals in Power BI, there's a hashtag you can use on LinkedIn, Twitter, any kind of social media, hashtag PBI core visuals. Put your wishes down. He'll hoover them up. He'll get in touch, at least provide you some feedback, if nothing else. But he's diligently listening to the community. But I'm a member of the community team that are out trying to foster feedback, but also trying to advise Microsoft on how to improve the core visuals. I'm a super user in the Power BI community, and I also write and release visuals to the App Store within Power BI. Most of those are certified, some are not. There's reasons, but I generally like to dabble around in the visualization layer quite a lot. Tonight, we're going to do a really quick whistle-stop tour of Deneb, but also why, because some of you will think it's not very in line with how Power BI works. There are reasons for that. We're going to talk about what the options are. We'll talk about how to think visually, rather than the way that you may be used to thinking of Power BI currently. We'll talk about the Deneb tooling, the languages that sit behind it, hopefully show you some aspirational stuff because we're not going to get a massive amount of ground covered today in terms of a demo. We'll do a demo, but I want to show you where people can take it. Can't really do that in 45 minutes, and hopefully Q&A. And if we go beyond the Q&A, find me afterwards. I'll talk the hind legs of this thing beyond the session, because I loves it. So I guess the key thing is, we all know Power BI, we all work in it. Yeah, there's a lot of nods. That's good. We're all in the right group. That's excellent. Um, I historically have worked all the way across the spectrum. So I used to start in architecture and BI projects, so modeling, ETL, visualization, the whole kind of thing. I guess I'm what you'd know as a full stack developer. A lot of people are. The hardest part of any BI project is communicating to your stakeholders that stuff's getting done. So everyone sees the visuals at the end, but while you're building the ETL, the models, they don't see anything. They bug you. How's it going? When am I seeing stuff? Um, Sounds familiar? Yeah. 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 Try and reassure them. It's coming. It's coming. All of a sudden, you see all this stuff. But the important thing about that is it is the window to your work. They don't care about your beautiful data model. I do. I think data models are amazing. But at the same time, the maintenance of that report, the pipelines, the ETL, the wonderful architecture you have behind it to make that solution sustainable and maintainable is something they don't see and use every day. The results of it they appreciate, but it's more the visual layer. So often, because Power BI is marketed as a clicky, draggy, droppy data tool, you can choose the charts and everything's awesome. We're led to believe that the visuals we choose off the palette are optimized for data visualization principles, and the short answer is they are not. That is being worked on by Microsoft as part of that core visuals initiative I talked about. But in the meantime, we're little I've been trusting of Microsoft. I had to educate myself quite a lot about data viz and what works and what doesn't work. And it's a whole field. So it's not just science, it's art. And it's not even just art. Some of it's guesswork, some of it's feel. That's the whole thing. It's really about finding what works for your users, but also making information that is truthful and useful and insightful and actionable and all those things that go with it. So when we let's just think strictly Power BI here. When we build a model, we can use the DAX language to build measures. We can change filter context. We can even change display if we're feeling savvy enough. We can do all kinds of tricks to play with our data and trick visuals into doing what we want sometimes. The key point there is we have a language we can play with. Now, when we also do, not sure how we would refer to it. It's been historically known as Power Query, but if I say Power Query, does people know what I'm talking about? Getting and transforming. You've got a nice interface. You can drag and drop your transforms. You can do things from the ribbon, but you can also open it up, and there's an advanced editor in there, and there's the M language behind that. So I think I'm seeing a lot of nods. I think most people know what that is. You don't have to touch that, but if you want to really beef up your transforms, you can do that. You can get taken out of the UI. We don't have that for visuals, not conventionally. We kind of do. And I guess the key thing about that is we actually have something called the Visuals Development Kit. I'm just going to simplify this down a bit. This is bookmarks, by the way. This is a feature called bookmarks that you might just have learned about. Now, somebody once told me that Power BI is the PowerPoint for data. I see that as more of a challenge than a truth. But I like to try and do everything I can because I can actually passively demonstrate Deneb for you. This visual you see here is data driven. It's bound to bookmarks. So this is a visual that we've built using Deneb that helps to illustrate the point. So we talk about out of the box options in Power BI. Think about the left side here. I'm terribly sorry I can't highlight bits on the screen, but hopefully my mouse is enough to attract your attention. But anything not clear, come find me afterwards. We've got the easy bits, the core and the custom visuals. If we want to do things with visuals in Power BI, we've got a model, we've got our data, we can choose visuals that Microsoft have given us or third-party people have developed and made available in the app source marketplace. To write those custom visuals, we have to go all the way over to the right in terms of complexity. So has anyone tried writing custom visuals? Does anybody? We've got one, we've got two. How many people know how to do web development? HTML, CSS, JavaScript. There's a show of hands, but it's not a skill that a lot of BI professionals have to hand. But if you want to write your own visuals using the supported tools, so when we said there's no visual language, there is, but it's actually a whole new set of skills. And let's say your boss comes up and says, "Oh, I want that chart to have this thing here and this thing here," and you've exhausted the properties and the DAX and everything else, and all of a sudden you're like, "Oh, I may actually, if they're removable on that, I have to build my own custom visual." And then how do you learn that kind of stuff on demand? The answer is not very easily, but this is the option that's available. So typically, if you consume a custom visual, people like myself, commercial vendors that sell visuals for Power BI, they work in this layer. They produce and package the visuals, they maintain them, they publish them to app source for you to consume. We talked about the DAX side of things. So just the right side of this kind of low code line is when you have to start understanding your filter context or just wrapping calculate around a whole bunch of measures a bunch of times, which is kind of how I work till it works. It doesn't work, wrap a calculate around it. Doesn't work, keep going. Yep. You can use creative use of DAX to game the system a little bit. And then in between that, we have kind of it's a Cody option, but does any folks in the room that know R and Python, the languages? Yeah, we've got a show of hands. So Microsoft makes some visuals available for you to write R and Python code, which is great. But has anybody used it in Power BI? R and Python in Power BI? Yeah, we've got a hand there. I think I can just see a hand at the back. Hello. Um, how did you find it? I think
the interaction between
Yeah.
some selections. So
Yeah. That sums it up. Easy, not very easy. Sorry, you said not very easy. It's not easy. The whole goal is that you're effectively getting access to a language that you should be able to transfer across. It's used all over the place. R and Python, very, very pervasive technologies, very powerful technologies. Unfortunately, because of the technology that Power BI sits on, they aren't interactive. They essentially come across, you can write your code. When Power BI kind of applies the data set, which is effectively a query result from the data model to your visual, um, it delegates that off to where the R or Python interpreter is stored. That's typically on your machine when you use Power BI Desktop. Does all the number crunching there, returns the result. The result has to be a static image, and pictures that are static cannot be interacted with. So the things you want to do, the cross highlighting, the cross filtering, the tooltips, context menus, drill through, all that stuff doesn't work with those visuals. There's also what we call a cold start, right? So we ever thought of the concept of cold start with engines? You know, start a car when it's cold, takes a little while to warm up. Same thing. Push the code somewhere else. It's got to run. It's got to push the result back. When you publish it up to the service, you're using Microsoft's R or Python. They host it up in the service. You're limited to what they make available. So if you found a really cool package, yeah, it doesn't work. And that's not cool. So there's all kinds of portability issues. You want to publish your report to the web? Sorry, you're out of luck. Can't use R and Python visuals because there's a compute cost, and publish to web is free. So that's just the way it is, unfortunately. And it's understandable as to why it is, but sometimes unless you unpack these things, you don't know why. The key thing is you've got this ability to kind of meet the Visual SDK halfway with a language as a data professional you may have used, but unfortunately there are limitations. A lot of people produce a whole bunch of custom visuals. This is a small sample of it, but we put these on the right side of the line here. And I say the right side of the line, it's the line that most Power BI folks are familiar with. We've got visuals like ValQ and InfoRiver. They're financial-based visuals. Synoptic Panel, Charticulator, PureVis, Sundance. These are all visuals that they have user interfaces or distinct purposes. You can do things to produce visuals or do more than just choosing a standard chart that does one thing. Interfaces run into the same issues that you have currently with properties in visuals. You know, if you go to a visual and you want to configure it and there's no property for it, Microsoft have to develop it if they have time. And amongst all the other stuff, you see there's a big thing come out this week called Fabric. That took a lot of their resources to develop. It's pretty big. But you're subject to their whims or, you know, the ideas for them or the feedback. You know, if you need that and no one else does, they got to weigh that up. They're a development company. They've got a backlog to do. You know what it's like when you've got to prioritize customer requirements. They've just got to do it like a million times bigger. Same with a custom visual vendor. You know, if you work with somebody, you know, let's say you use Zebra BI. I don't know if anyone's heard of Zebra BI, but it's a very well-established financial visual in Power BI. It's commercial, but it's really, really good at what it does. If it doesn't do what you want, you can ask them to do it. But again, you've got to let them deliver it. You got to wait for it to go through the publish process. And you probably don't have time for that. But it is what it is. What I did was I released a visual called HTML content. So I don't know if anyone's used that. It's a thank you. That is a visual that lets you just well, the intention was that you could write measures or use columns that contain HTML. And the whole thing around it was we could have some nice rich text or something. But then I learned that people are incredibly patient and they will write thousands of lines of DAX to produce output that they can completely control. And there are some people on, you know, with people like Jeff Snalves on LinkedIn, people like Kerry Kolosko, who's an MVP down in Adelaide, in Australia. These people are building whole experiences in this visual. They are so patient and they take it to the nth degree. And this taught me something that we can meet people halfway. People are prepared to put the effort in if they don't necessarily have to learn they might have to learn something, but if they can iterate prototype quickly with some feedback, you know, if we build a custom visual, we've got to learn how to do web development. We've got to learn the quirks of that. We've got to learn how Power BI works under the hood. We have to package it and test it. And if it doesn't work, we've got to repeat ad nauseum until we get it right. And then we've got to build in responsiveness and all those other things we take for granted. You know, you may swear and shout about core visuals, but you may not, but sometimes I do. All that kind of cool stretching and responsiveness and the way the axes, you know, reduce down the labels and stuff, that's incredibly complicated programming. And if you want to do that yourself, you don't get it for free. You've got to kind of learn how to do it. And that's the point of something like Deneb that we're talking about today. So we're gonna tease you around the concept a little bit more before we get to Deneb. But this is the purpose of Deneb. This is I'm kind of just trying to explain why we're doing something that's very non-Power BI like. So we pick and choose visuals from palette, whether it's a custom visual or a core visual. And a lot of tools do this. Excel does it. Even Tableau does it, if you've used Tableau. But it's really good when we know what we want. When we want to, often there are tools like chart choosers. There are well-established cases like, if you want to show data over time and a measure, you typically put the measure on the y-axis, and you may use a line chart because time is linear. We understand that. Culturally, here, typically left to right, we understand the flow of time. We may want to orient the chart into a bar chart for categorical data because that doesn't make sense to us to read left to right, because there's all kinds of things. But so there are rules, but the rules are, you can play with the rules. That's the fun part. What if you want to do that though? What if I choose a bar chart in Power BI and I want to change it to something else? Well, I might be able to, but I might not. What if I want to do something more complex? Like if I want to put something on the bar chart, I've got labels and I may have some analytics lines that I could choose, but who has maybe tried to put one chart over another one? Yeah,
PowerPoint.
yeah, yeah. You're not the first, because being able to layer information contextually increases density. Information density is good as long as it's sensible, but we want to be able to condense that stuff down. We want to be able to make our readers focused and be able to digest information quickly. Now, very quickly, because I'm looking at the clock and I'm already over time. If who's had the problem? What kind of problems do we have when we layer visuals? That's it. Well, that's the key thing, right? Axes don't line up, or they kind of do, but the design's a bit different. So an axis is like above the other one. Yeah, exactly. And sometimes there's a lot of stuff you don't want because it's duplicated work. So you've got to turn a whole bunch of stuff off. So it's great that we can choose stuff. And I guess the key thing is, and I don't know how well this is going to stick out, but the top row here of the page, this palette here, we've got 6 different types of chart that are all rectangles. They're all the same shape. They're all just telling a slightly different story. So at least a seventh of the available core visuals are dedicated to bar charts are real handy. I'm not saying they're not, but you can choose 6 different kinds of bar charts. And what if you want to do see how something works? What if we want to have low level control, properties that we don't necessarily know we want or need? If it might be a nice idea that Microsoft does a change for us, but how do we know that it's going to work? Because we don't know it's there. How can we explore that? And what we're kind of leading to here is thinking the other way up, thinking visually. So instead of starting with a known quantity, I need a bar chart for that. I need a line chart for that. Start with the data and work from let's say the bottom up, because if we think about the data at the bottom, think about a visual as a top-down design. You're choosing a visual and you're just kind of customizing it. Start with the data, and then we break it down into components, much like Lego. And I guess the easiest way to explain this is when and I'm probably showing my age. I don't know if it's the same at school now, but when I was a kid, I learned how to draw charts when I was about 5, and they gave me some squared paper and a pencil and a ruler. And they taught me what I needed to do. I had to draw axes. I had to draw the bars on the page. It was the height of kids in my class, and we had to kind of work out how many squares were. It was feet and inches. It's in New Zealand we have the metric system. It's so simple. Everything's metric. It's great. Anyway, I digress. But I had to learn how to draw a chart and what it meant, and understand what the implications of my choices were. And a tool like this could be quite good. Think about structuring our data from the ground up. Think about how those things break down. Not too hard, but they're there. Scales, marks, mark being a bar or a line, something that represents our data as a primitive shape. And then aesthetics, things like shading or color or borders, or those cosmetic elements that we can use to enrich our data. And we need some functionalities to join these together. And this is referred to as a grammar of graphics. I don't know if anyone's heard of the concept of a grammar of graphics, but it is quite simply what it is. It is a language that you could use to theoretically design data visualizations. And that is what we call declarative rather than imperative. And what I mean by declarative versus imperative is very simple. Declarative is a case of saying, I want something to do this. Imperative is, here's how this needs to be built. And the easiest way I can explain that is with a very short slide here. And look at that. I didn't set it back to my start bookmark. We've got a table here, and I do apologize I can't zoom in, but hopefully it should be evident that we have 5 cities in New Zealand, and we have a measure for average temperature. So Power BI, once we put a column in, it's going to create groups, and measures are aggregated against groups. So we quite simply have location, average temperature. This is a table. This is useful. but we want to, let's think about a bar chart. We still have the same data underneath. Think of it as a table. Imperative, we've got to think about how many pixels we've got on the screen. Because if we, think of it as paper. We've got squares on a piece of paper. We've got width, we've got height. We need to understand what canvas we have to work with. What we need to do, because pixels and squares on paper don't always line up with our numbers or our groups. So what we almost have to do is we have to think, if we were doing this imperatively, we have to work out how much height each category should take up. It should be ideally evenly spaced, because that's typically how we best read things as humans. Makes a lot of sense. Very, very quick. It's a pattern. We can understand it. We also need to think about our measure, our physical space. How much distance do we use for each unit? Now, if it's sales and you've got £1 million, you don't have 1 million pixels on the screen. You might have 100. So you've got to work out how to scale that down. This is something that you would have to do if you were coding. And right now, we're just building up this conceptual bar chart here, where we've kind of got this area reserved for each category, and this width will represent our measure value. But people aren't very good at that. The computer needs that. We read axes. So axes are a representation of scales. The axis tells us what the category is, and we digest the measure down into intervals. So right now we can see that our y-axis here has 16 as a value. So what we're saying is we've worked out in the back end, when we've coded this up, it's probably about, the highest value there is 15.4. So we kind of need to go over 15.4, but we need everything to be nice and even, because that's going to help us digest this data. And last but not least, we then need what we call the marks, the things that actually tell us what the data is. So normally I might sort this chart into order of descending order, so the highest one at the top. But it's very easy for us right now to just look at that and go, I can see that Auckland has the highest average temperature. I can see that Christchurch has the lowest out of the cities that I've got on here. And because we're very good at judging length, our psychology is such that we can actually look at something like a bar and go, that's longer than that bar. Now, there's a lot of people that are zealots about pie charts and how bad they are. They're not necessarily bad, they're just not best suited to some things. So listen carefully about what people say about pie charts. We're just not very good at guessing angles. So if you've got a lot of series on a pie chart, it's very hard to read. If you've got 2 or 3 and the use case for what you're trying to say is correct, like it's a proportion of something, great, go nuts. But think often about how we perceive things. And bars are great. Bars aren't exciting, but they get the job done. And there are a lot of people that say most charts can be bar charts, and they're not wrong. But we can then style this up. We've put a color onto it. We could have a grid. We have taken away the placeholders, and we've now got something that we recognize. If we were going to code that up, now you don't have to really read this, but this is that visual SDK, the custom visual language, the web development stuff we talked about. If you want to write a bar chart for Power BI, this is the kind of stuff you've got to do. You've got to write a lot of code. This is a project on GitHub, and this is one file from that project, but this is the file that does most of what you want. But I'm just going to talk. This is logic to do all the stuff we talked about, to work out how properties are bound in the pane, how to make things responsive, how to deal with all those things that you might think about. And this doesn't do everything. This is just to get me started. This is like a hello world program, if people are familiar with that term. You don't need to see the code, but it's nearly 800 lines of code. If I wanted to write a basic bar chart in a hurry, imperatively, and perhaps understand my domain, that's a lot of code to learn and understand. That's not cool. Thinking about declarative, what we might call a grammar of graphics framework, what we might want to do instead is think about a specification, a set of instructions, and say, let's make some complex output from that. I want to tell something what to do, and it does what I asked. That almost sounds like programming. It kind of is, but it's a much more higher abstraction. The goal is to meet the machine in the middle. So what if we make a bar chart like we saw and we wanted to change it to a different type? Rather than finding another chart, we could maybe just specify a line instead, or a point, or something like that. Adding additional encodings. When we talk about encodings, that's where the data gets mapped on the physical output, which channel, X, Y, color, those kind of things, size, these things that mean sense to us. And what if we want to put additional things on? You know, so I've got a bar, but what if I want to overlay an average line? Now I can do that in Power BI, but what if I wanted to overlay you know, we saw a bar chart there, and we know in Power BI we have a combo chart that we can have column chart and a line on it. But what if we wanted to turn it around and put a line like that? We can't do that, but we might be able to. The thing is, these are incredibly rare systems. I don't know if any of you have used Tableau, know what it is. Tableau is effectively a very, very good grammar of graphics user interface. They have a ton of people working on it, years and years of R&D. It's really, really good. Charticulator, which is a custom visual that Microsoft were incubating, and I was very fond of until it's kind of stopped, which is a shame. Was a grammar of graphics, still is, but it's a grammar of graphics UI. You've got to think differently, but you can actually map data to things and see what happens and prototype and iterate and produce things that your boss has been nagging you for. Bit more easily once you get the hang of it. They can still be subject to functional constraints. You know, Tableau has a user interface, so only the features they make available to you are there. Similar thing. They might be able to deliver it more easily, but you still might have to wait for them. And this is and also you need big teams. I said that, but somebody like me who has been on a journey of developing custom visuals and wishes to bring a tool like Deneb to you, I'm one person. I do this in my free time, so I'm kind of here selling you this thing, but I don't really, you know, I do it for fun almost, which is kind of weird, but you know, it's my hobby. I like it. Has anybody heard of JSON? Yeah, there's a lot of nods. So I don't need to spend too long on this, but for those that aren't familiar, I mean, we've got an example on the right here. This is a machine language, but it's effectively a storage format, you know, and you may have worked with web services or other things that deliver data into Power BI in these formats. And it's very, very simple. It can be very, very extensible, but the concepts are simple. You've got name value pairs, and they can be string text values, they can be numbers, they can be true or false. They can be what we call objects, more complex things with their own key and value pairs. We can have repeating items, but it's very easy for you to look at this thing on the right without any knowledge of programming. And there's a little bit of my life there that, you know, this is like a little icebreaker because I'm not able, you know, particularly until now, I've been kind of busy prepping and stuff, and I haven't been able to mingle. I hope to do that afterwards. But you can learn a little bit about me by doing this. You can understand how many pets I have. You can understand that, you know, I've got a couple of hobbies, and you know, I'm 42 years old. That's okay. I'm all right with that. I'm from New Zealand. My name's Daniel. This is quite straightforward. This is something that you can understand and a machine can understand. It's a halfway point. So if we were to produce some kind of language, this isn't a bad idea. We don't have a user interface. It's not clicking and dragging and dropping, but it's possible. You know, you as a human can read and write this stuff, and a machine can take it and understand it. And fortunately, there's something already that does it. And it's called, there are two tools. There's one called Vega, and there's one called Vega Lite. And these are languages that are grammar of graphics implementations, and they were originally built by the University of Washington Interactive Data Lab. So that is kind of like in a database field, they're kind of like you know, they're like the goats. They're really, they're doing a lot of great stuff with the fields of data visualization. They're doing a lot of research and development. I don't know if any of you have heard of the tool D3 for building visuals. Yeah.
I found it.
Yeah, it came out of there. Vega itself is built on top of D3. So the people that helped create it, they're, you know, they continue to incubate these tools, and a lot of the people that have moved on are still contributing to them. You know, some of these people work at Apple, um, really large companies. They're still helping contribute to these languages and evolving them. So these languages have been in the, you know, the lexicon of data viz for the last 7 or 8 years, and they're continuing to evolve. And why wouldn't I use those? Because it's not proprietary to Microsoft. You can get help on Stack Overflow, on all kinds of sites you might normally kind of ask for help. So we're not inventing a new DAX here. We're actually bringing something in that could be portable. And if you get something to work in Power BI in Vega or Vega Lite, you can take it somewhere else. That's the cool thing about it. So these languages, just as a quick aside, I'm not going to spend too long on them, but just to give you an idea, we saw an 800 line piece of code for a bar chart. With Vega, this is the Vega website, by the way. It's very well documented, and we can't focus on specifics about this today, and the links will be available. But they have a page of examples, and we can look that this tool can produce all kinds of stuff. Some you've seen, some you haven't seen. Circle packing is an interesting one. These nice little heat maps, parallel coordinate plots. These are things that you can probably get custom visuals for. But these are cases that are starting to maybe make this as an attractive option. Hey, I can't build that in Power BI. How do I find out about it? Well, you can look at the examples, and I might just zoom this in a bit. Sorry, this one I will zoom in. So this is a bar chart with axes and everything else, and this underneath is some JSON. And try not to be too disheartened by this. It is something that needs some understanding. I'm not kind of just saying, hey, it's going to work like that. But it's much more simpler in terms of directive. You don't have to write a lot of code. I mean, this piece here is data. We do have to think about scaling and specifying how things work. We have to specify marks. But this is probably about 60 lines. So we're already better. This is a little bit to take on. But that's why the team who write Vega have produced Vega Lite. So Vega Lite is better for newcomers. This is for your more common use cases where you need something, but you want to elevate its design. It's very flexible, but it's very easy to get into. So that sits on top of Vega. Vega sits on top of tools like D3 that we just talked about, and they sit on the web layer. So when we look at the examples for Vega Lite, I'll just zoom this out again because there's quite a lot now. Vega Lite's used by a lot more people because it's more accessible. So we can see the kind of charts we're used to seeing. But we're hopefully seeing some stuff we may not have seen in Power BI before as I go down. Histograms, density plots, isotype plots, strip plots, histogram plots, lines, comet charts, shaded areas, stream graphs, all these kind of things. There's even a section for circular plots, even though they can be somewhat polarizing. But there's lots and lots of examples in here. You can start to layer things up. There's box plots. There's all kinds of things. Let's look at the bar chart example here and zoom in. So similar result that we saw before. Throw away that, which is basically the static data. You've got 4 lines underneath. I think we can work with that. What we're effectively saying there is, and I'll highlight this the other way around. Normally I'd use zoom it for this, so I'm having it improvise. That's saying make a bar and map its x coordinate, that's the x-axis, the horizontal, to field A. Our data set's not very exciting. And we're doing a couple of things. We're saying that it's a nominal type. So nominal means it's categorical field. It's a field like a group. That's just the data viz term. But we're basically saying this is how the axis should behave. Turn the labels to 0 degrees. Label angle. That's something we can read. That makes sense. Label angle, 0. Yeah, 0 degrees. Pop them around. Why? Use the B field. That's effectively a measure. It's what's known as quantitative. That's effectively a continuous axis for those that use the drop-downs of Power BI. But a quantitative variable is effectively a measure. It scales linearly. There are what you're effectively doing here is saying, here's how my axis should behave. So we can work with that. And that's when we come to Deneb. So Deneb is basically an implementation of those languages in Power BI. You use JSON. Again, very hard to write UI. Maybe one day, not yet. There's lots to do. But basically, you put your JSON spec in, you bind it to your visual data set. So with an R or a Python visual, you drag a bunch of columns and measures in, and you do your code based off that. The concept is the same. But the big difference here is this sits in the same technical stack as Power BI. And what that means is we can actually do things like tooltips, interactivity, cross-filtering, cross-highlighting, things that make your visuals feel like they're part of Power BI. That's the neat part. So I'm not saying it's easy, but we have the capability to start. You start with something simple, but if you want to evolve your design, Deneb gives you the integration. It's not always 100% seamless, but you can get much, much further with this than you could with writing a visual from scratch or using R or Python. Because it's a packaged visual, it's added from app source, it's totally self-contained. So the scenario we talked about earlier with Python and R, where you've got to have something somewhere, that's not a factor. The runtimes, both Vega and Vega Lite, are built into the visual. So what that means is publish it up to the service, it's going to work. Put it in a mobile report, it'll work. Publish to web, it'll work. It's also certified. So you're aware of certification around custom visuals? Yeah. Anybody see that as a really important thing? Anybody's companies don't allow uncertified visuals? Quite a few. For me, that was a really important thing to do because a lot of people come to me and ask me to develop visuals for them. So private companies will say, I need this visual for this reason, and we will talk about, I'm a professional services person. We'll talk about a price, and a quote, and then they'll say, oh, and I need it to be certified as well because I want to export it to PDF. And the problem is that if you want a certified visual, you've got to submit it to AppSource. It's got to be visible in the marketplace. Now, you may be able to hide the visual through a license key or something that only the business knows about, but it has to be in the marketplace for Microsoft to even consider it for certification. So with Visual like Deneb, what we're effectively trying to do is give people the power to produce their own designs and trust that they will still have the benefits of being certified. We're giving you the environment and you can just go nuts. That's effectively what's happening. So we do have a website, and what I haven't said, and I probably should have said at the beginning, unless people didn't see, I'll just jump back real quick. I'll put this up at the end. This is, looking at the wrong presentation. That's why. There is a QR code. I'll put it up at the end if you want to get the workbook. Yeah, this is actually the workbook you would download, which is why things are a bit weird, because things aren't where they should be. Normally there'd be a QR code. I'll bring it up, but there is a URL as well, deneb.link/pbimcr. I'll put it up at the end, so you can download this and play with it if none of it is immediately obvious. But effectively, there are some links to the website. So Deneb has its own website, deneb-biz.github.io. This focuses more on the Power BI side of things rather than reinventing the wheel, because you can go to the Vega documentation and the Vega Lite documentation and look it up. But ultimately, we talk to you about how to get started, simple examples, how the editor works, the data set, that kind of thing. We'll do a quick intro now, but if you ever want to know more about something, I'd recommend starting here. Obviously, ask me questions tonight. Start here because we try and fill in the Power BI stuff for you. Right. And I don't know, I always mean to say this, but forget, and then someone asked me at the end. The reason it is called Deneb, I'll save a question now. Vega, the tooling that Deneb is built on, is all based around the star Vega, which is the biggest star in the constellation of Lyra. They actually have a tool called Lyra, which is kind of an attempt at a graphical design. Hasn't quite got out. But I don't know, any of you who've used Python have heard of Altair. That's a data viz library for Python. It's actually built on Vega and Vega Lite. So they've got that one. And there's this fellow here, Deneb, which is the biggest, brightest star in the Cygnus constellation. Now, Vega, Altair, and Deneb make an asterism, which is kind of like a connection between several constellations. That's called the Southern Triangle, but Deneb was free. No one was having it. I used it as a code name originally, and the teams were very supportive of saying, yeah, come in, join us, which was really nice of them. So it's called Deneb. It didn't mean to be called Deneb, but it is, and it's stuck. So I'm going to have to load another workbook, but we're effectively going to build this. We'll do it step by step, but this is a visual that has the ability to show report page tooltips. We can cross filter by clicking on points. We can see our visuals on the page updating. And I can click another visual on the page and it will cross highlight. So please bear with me for 2 seconds while I fire up the right one. Because I know here's one I prepared earlier as a big thing here, right? Certainly when I was growing up. But let's really quickly whiz through this and just get you into what to expect. So we'll just fire up the right workbook. And of course, because Teams is running, it's going super slow. So we might have to improvise here. You know what I like now is you can actually say, no, forget it, I don't care. Only recently, they actually removed the ability to say, no, I don't want Power BI Desktop to load, please. Kind of like Excel does and PowerPoint does. So we'll just hide that one out of the way. Deneb is available from AppSource. So you can find it by going into Get More Visuals. This one's going to do the same thing now, isn't it? The first one's always, oh, no, this might actually work. So for those that are not familiar, AppSource is the custom visual marketplace in Power BI. You can get into it from the menu. Ooh, Deneb's actually a featured visual now. That's news. Didn't know that. So instead of searching for it, it's here. But you can just search for it. Click on it and install it like you could any regular custom visual. There is a sample workbook included with a few examples in, but you would add that just like you would any other visual. I've already got it in my report because it's basically pinned to my Power BI desktop, because you can pin custom visuals if you use them all the time, and I use Deneb an awful lot. But essentially, we've got, this isn't an optimal layout, but we've got a slicer with a whole bunch of New Zealand cities. So there's a little bit of Southern Hemisphere learning for people. What's that? Thank you. We have a slicer, we have a map. What I find is learning about this stuff helps you to get better at core visuals too. These are all core visuals. There's a map with Christchurch highlighted, which is the nearest city to where I'm currently living. We've got the average temperature by month. Notice this time of year, stuff's upside down. It's cold and dark. So we're going to do what we just saw, which is to produce a really dense visual, information dense. So when we add Deneb to the report, it's not like any other visual. You don't see something already. This is essentially a little landing page, which will get better as we develop. It tells you how to get started, and all you have to do is think of Deneb visuals as tables. So when we did the bar chart walkthrough, we said, here's a measure and a column. Everything you add to a table is what sits underneath. So if I would have a table visual, and I'd add my, let's put my year month in, which is my month start, and I'll put in my average temperature measure. So I've got a whole bunch of stuff here because my data goes all the way back to the 1950s. But I've got a table with a row per month start and the corresponding measure value. This is what it's going to look like underneath. So when I think about building a visual from scratch, I got to think what my data set looks like. I'll turn that back into a Deneb visual. And for those that don't know, we can make visuals have what we call advanced editor functionality. So normally visuals you just play with, move around, put into position, use properties, configure them. Deneb's a little bit different. So once you've got your data, it doesn't have to be in here, but it's better to start with something and then click on the ellipsis here, and then there's an extra option called edit. So we'll click on edit, and this will open up a totally different interface, full screen. Because this is the first time we've created a visual in this container, we get the option to start with a couple of simple ones. So we've got the option to I've put some basic ones in. We can either use Vega Lite or Vega, or we can import from templates. So if you do some work, you can actually abstract your work up into a template. You can whack it off into source control. You can share it with people. People can import it into this tool, and they can map their data. So if I would, the functionality is similar to this. If I click on this simple bar chart, this is a template that I've built into the visual. I can create generic names for my fields, and I can choose my columns or measures. So let's say, category is year month, but that's probably a little too much cardinality. I could add a location name, and then that becomes available for me to choose. And then when I click create, it would auto create my bar chart. Now this is built into the visual. It's on the worked example on the website, but we're going to focus on something a bit different because we can build bar charts in Power BI really easily. So I'm just going to go empty. And what this will do is we'll bring up the interface, and there's a couple of things we've got to think about here. We've got a JSON editor on the left. We've got our visual preview here, which doesn't really do anything exciting. And down at the bottom, we've got our data. What I will do is I will just increase the editor text size a little bit. What I would say is, we're recording this, so the video will be visible for you to have a look at, but please come up afterwards if you want to see it in more detail. I will try my best to, this is probably the most legible for the situation, but we'll see what happens. Down the bottom, we have a preview of our data set here. So this is our year month column, and this is our average temperature, and we can kind of have a look at that, and we can paginate through it and just explore our data without going back. One thing that you'll see is there's this little dotted area, and this represents our container size on the canvas. Power BI doesn't let us programmatically change the size of a visual. We have to go into the properties pane and set its width and height, or we have to drag it. I can't change that from here. So if you don't like the size of it, my advice is jump back out, make it a size that you think you'll be happy with. And it becomes more evident when we get in there. But just to give us some, what I'd like to try and do is zoom that in a bit as well, so you can see what we're doing. But you can see now this footprint has changed, and I can zoom that to fit. So hopefully you should be able to see the gray dotted area. Really quickly, we will build a line chart, and for time, I'm going to copy paste some things I've got, because talking and typing ain't clever if you're me. So what I'm doing here is I'm binding data to what's known as a named data set. It's called data set, and that actually relates to what's in the, they're called data roles. I don't know if anybody knows that. People call them wells, buckets, field containers. They're actually called data roles. There's a little bit of trivia there. So everything we add into the values data role, effectively a table, is bound to this little piece here. All that's telling Vega Lite to do is connect to that. We have to specify that. We can also manually put our own data in if we want. We probably wouldn't, but we could. So that bar chart example we saw, we could just lift and shift that and it would be static and work. So you've got the option, but you would more often than not want to do this. What we're now saying is create a line, and the encoding is the mapping of data to what we call channels, the x-axis, the y-axis, color, size, all kinds of stuff. At the minute, we're just saying on the x-axis, use that year-month field, and this is a type we didn't see. This is temporal, time-based. That's going to tell Vega Lite to deal with that for us. It's not evenly spaced. It's got a continuum. The Y channel goes to our average temperature measure, and that is quantitative. That is a linear measure. Let's see some results. Click the button. Now, that's a pretty noisy chart, but we can read it. We've got years, because even though this is a year month, or the first of the month, Vega Lite has already worked out that it's temporal, and it's already drawn the axis labels for us. We didn't have to worry about that. We've got our measure, and yes, there's a lot of stuff in here, but it did what we asked. Now, if I wanted to change that mark to a point, I can change it here and reapply. And now I've got dots. You know, I could immediately play with the concept. Now, if I wanted to say, turn that line so that the X and Y were swapped, which is something you can't do in Power BI, I can just swap it around. It's going to look even noisier because we've got less space to play with, but we can. We shouldn't all, just because we can doesn't mean we should, but we can at least understand what happens if it does. So let's just undo that. This is just a really basic example. And if I go back here, I can click and drag my canvas, and you see that Vega Lite is actually dealing with all the fun of making the axis labels, less of them, or, actually shrinking and growing and making it responsive. So this is something that we don't have to take care of. Vega Lite is doing it for us. Deneb is passing that into Vega Lite. So instead, what we want to do is make that information more easy to digest. This, all we can see is that temperature varies over time. And we have seasons, we understand that, but we can't understand what part of the year that changes. You might know now that December through February, it's supposedly the coldest month of the year, but not for me. I'm loving being here, by the way, because I've just come out of winter back into summer. It's awesome. And sadly, I'm going back to winter again in a week's time, but that's okay. So we'll start with the basic concept. Normally, I would type this out, and I am conscious that I'm already horrendously over time. Hopefully, that's okay. What I'm doing now is I'm changing the encoding to a rectangle instead of a line. And what I've done is I've still got the same fields. That's a date field. But what I've said is for the x-axis, I'm using this thing called time unit. What I'm saying is that it's still a temporal field, but just pull out the year. Vega Lite will understand what that means. For the y, I'm doing the same field, but I'm pulling the month out. And because it's now what's known as ordinal, we're saying this has an order to it. So ordinal, January, February, March, April. Normally you'd use a sort column. If you specify it's ordinal, Vega Lite has some functionality built in to understand months. You could use ordinal for t-shirt sizes or something like that. It has an order to it. It makes sense. And then what we've done is we've bound the color to average temperature, and we've made that quantitative or linear. So it creates this lovely little ramp. And now we can look at this chart, and let's just zoom this in a bit. I'll just take this down a bit here, zoom it in. But we can understand that, we can read this. We know January to December, top to bottom. It makes sense to us. We know that time flows left to right, at least culturally here. And we can see based on, and the color choice isn't perhaps the best, but you can change that. That's something you can play with. But you can see where the cold stuff is. It's in the middle of the year for me, at least. And the hot stuff's on the January, December end of things. But we've turned our line chart into something that's really easier to read. And we can go across and down, and we can find certain time. But it's not enough to have a chart. We need it to be actionable. So we need to start looking at things like tooltips. You know, this is great, but it's still busy. It's easy to read, but it's still like that. Now, Deneb has a settings pane. We can change over between providers. We probably won't do that because we're staying with Vega Lite. We can change our render mode. So what that means is that currently we're using what's known as SVG. These are really smooth, crisp graphics, but there's a performance cost when you have a lot of data points because it's like having a lot of visuals on a page. Stuff slows down. Canvas is more like a static image, but we do get the benefits in here of being able to still apply the interactivity because the Vega folks have thought really hard about how to implement that. But it is a way of speeding things up. If you're plotting, and Deneb will do more than 30,000 rows, but then it's contingent on your data model performance. But if you have a lot of dots in a visual, it can really slow things down. The canvas takes the edge off that. But down the bottom, we've got these interactivity options. So two enabled by default: tooltip handler and resolve data points in context menu. Cross highlight and cross filtering aren't visible. The reason they're not enabled is because when you build a visual, if you don't do the right stuff when people click on it, so click on a bar chart in Power BI, what happens? Oh, come on.
Filter.
Yeah, but it filters. But
Drill down.
what happens to the bars graphically? Yeah. The one that you're interested in, or ones that you're interested in, stay solid. The ones that you aren't interested in go translucent or less opaque. Visuals don't do that unless you tell them how to behave. So we give you the functionality in Deneb to handle those states, but you have to do a little bit of stuff to say, if it's selected, I need to. Anyway, we'll show you that in a minute. Tooltips are free and context menu is free. So I can right click on this point here and I could include or exclude it. If I had a drill through, it would work because it knows the context. We don't have to do anything for you, so we turn that on. Tooltip handling, you'll notice I don't get one. But we turn it on passively because what you actually want to do is think where the tooltip should work. You know, if I draw this chart, great, this is one chunk of stuff, but I might put labels on, I might put extra lines on, and I don't want everything to be tooltipped. I actually want to specify what's triggers. So I have a tooltip page that I've already built, but all I'm going to do is find this rectangle mark, and I'm going to just pass in tooltip true. True. This is, I could have copy pasted this and I should have done. Now, this is a little untidy. I can repair and format that so it looks a little more readable. Now, we didn't see any discernible change, but all this is saying here is to Vega Lite, turn on the fact that this mark will trigger a tooltip. And 5, I'm going to gun it really fast. So we may not be able to do everything in detail. If things interest you, come find me. I'll skip to the end in a sec. But we can now hover over this and the context is resolved. So I can now see this is June 72, and I've got a tooltip that breaks out the days of the month. And this is a core visual, by the way, but this is just a line chart with error bars on it. But I can now see the high and low, the main average for the day, but I can get my context without going away. So all I had to do was say, whack a tooltip on it. Deneb resolves it for you. You can use normal tooltips. You can actually customize the fields in tooltips. So if you want to add multiple fields to the visual, or even calculate your own inside, Vega Lite lets you do calculations. You can do calculated fields, aggregates, all kinds of stuff without adding extra measures. It's up to you. We'll skip to the end because actually you saw what it did. It would take a little time for me to explain the theory behind it. What I want to do is show you some aspirational stuff. I think that's probably better. And if you have questions after you've eaten or after this, just come find me. I'll sit and talk with you about this. I'm quite happy to do that. So in terms of what's happening, when I launched Deneb, I was kind of the only person really using this thing in the Power BI space. So I kind of, I don't want to say like, oh, you kids have got it so easy, I had to learn how this works and I had to figure it out. But what's really great about our community is there are people that get excited about the tooling, and how can I help is usually what happens. So I've got some people that saw this, understood how it worked, and really helped building examples. So people like, if we go to Deneb's website, we've got a community page, and what I'm doing here is I'm pulling in all the stuff I know about. So we've got websites that people have put together to show their examples and share their templates. We've got some YouTube videos. So there's a much longer form session. If you know Reed Havens, he's an MVP in the US. He talks to like everybody and pulls them all in. I've been fortunate enough to guest with him on this, and we did about an hour and a half session to delve into this in more detail. For the Spanish language folks, we've got Jose Escalante. He has a YouTube playlist of all his explorations. Anyone know Ben Ferry, Power BI guy? Yeah, he'll like that. I'll pass that on. He has a playlist. Mike Carlo from Power BI Tips. He has done an intro. We've got anyone got an Enterprise DNA subscription? Yeah, no, yeah, no. But if you've got one, they do a course. Other folks have got GitHub repositories of their templates. Kerry, fantastic person that really started it all off in terms of community contribution. She shares what she learns. She's got a great mind for creativity and psychology. If you download the Deneb sample workbook, that's a smattering of it. So this is if you go to AppSource and download Deneb, you know there's a heat map example with slightly more temperature related colors. You can do things like this is a rain cloud plot, which is a box, violin, and jitter plot. Kerry very graciously showed how you could not just use Vega Lite, but DAX to. This is the same data. She wanted to come up with the idea of prototyping designs so she could put them in front of all of the stakeholders and say, what do you like? So this is the same data, but it was multiple Vega Lite specifications, all kind of doing the same thing, KPIs over time, showing you how things like, if this was a filter context, conditional formatting, conditional shading, all kinds of things. She very graciously shared this. We've got linkage to the Power BI themes. So if your report theme is different, you can actually bind the report theme to the colors. So I'm changing my theme. You can actually access the individual theme colors as well. And we've actually got the ability for you to shade them by percentages. You can access the divergent and sentiment colors. Feedback from the community lets us build this up. So we're putting more and more stuff in. Tace, great guy, worth follow on Twitter. He's just done the Big Book of Dashboards. If anyone's read that, it's a great book, but none of it applies to Power BI. He's built all the examples out of that, and he's shared them. I think with these you may have to buy him a coffee, but he'll share you all the stuff, and he talks through a lot of examples. Ben Ferry, Power BI guy, he's got a site where he shares his templates. He's also got his YouTube channel. Andrzej Liszkiewicz uses Vega, so the lower level one, but he produces and shares his work. So he did the climate stripes. Build a horse out of data, because why not? You can combine charts in the same container with the same data. So this is a high-level chart with a lower-level breakdown. Like a swing plot for elections. Small multiples, two-dimensional small multiples. The famous COVID spiral, if anyone's familiar with that. This population pyramid, this is all running inside Power BI. You can see the publish to web thing under here. He also built this wonderful cartogram for the DataViz championships recently, which is Vega and Power BI. So this is an isotype map. It's a stylized map, but there's a lot of measures and metrics in here about how the world is governed. David Bacci, if you follow him on LinkedIn, he is really pushing the boundaries. He makes all his work available. He's built this bank failures plot, which is doing the rounds on Wall Street Bets on Reddit quite a lot, and data is beautiful. Calendars, the coronation recently, he did a chart to show lifespan of monarchs and their how long they were monarchs, but also how old they were. Animated COVID map, animated data points that do writing, Gantt chart. This one is really, really good because Power BI doesn't do good Gantt charts. Stylized visuals. He recently did this decomposition tree, all kinds of stuff. I built this one, and I'm going to stop after this, I promise. These are all 3 Deneb visuals. This is the NASA climate change data. I was able to build custom interactivity into this thing, hover over, get data points, click on a month, see everything in context. I can talk more about this if you're interested. There we go. So we see the data points in context, plus the reference ranges. I was able to hover it, build the functionality and to hover the point and make it bigger instead of just give you a tooltip. Little small multiple chart with a little line that hovers over. You can go nuts with this thing. I will wrap it up. I think we probably don't have time for Q&A, but I'm approachable. Please feel free to ask anything. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your time.